Hey everybody, my name is Steven and I am the host of the Going Somewhere podcast. And before we jump into today's episode, I want to thank you for watching today. If you haven't already, please subscribe so you can stay up to date with every new episode and leave some comments. Let us know what your big takeaways are and how this podcast is impacting you. Without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to our wonderful host, Steven. Hey everybody, welcome to this episode of the Going Somewhere podcast. My name is Steven and today I am joined by Hannah Schermerhorn. I'm going to read her bio before we introduce her a little bit more, but Hannah lives in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. She's an electrical engineer who has worked in legal, business, and global marketing. Hannah enjoys traveling, reading, spending time with her nieces and nephews, and she's also the author of a brand new book called Single Life to Live. Stop waiting for your life to begin and thrive where God has you today. What's up, Hannah? How are you?
I'm good. Thank you for having me.
It is my privilege and my honor. I've been looking forward to this conversation. Tell us a little bit more about yourself. You heard your own bio. So what comes to mind when you hear your bio? Who is Hannah?
I think when I hear my bio, I think I had a hard time figuring out what I want to be when I grow up, and I still am doing that. So I feel like I'm someone who, I went to school for electrical engineering because I really liked math and that seemed good. And then I took a step into legal and was like, okay, I like writing, but I don't like writing legal documentation. So then I did more electrical engineering, marketing, and then ultimately had this dream of writing a book and followed that. And now I've switched into it, which I'm super excited about.
That's amazing. Have you always been like a dreamer? Is that something that's kind of been a trait for you?
Yeah, I feel like a little bit, but this is the first time that I really went after this dream in a really hard way. So I've always had ideas of things, but I thought they were just distractions from what I should be doing. And now I realize, no, God really uses some of the dreams that we have. So I pursued this one and now I'm like, I gotta keep doing it with anything that I have.
That's amazing. What was like when you were 5? Like, what was your dream job? Like, you probably went through several of them, like we all did.
Yes.
But what was kind of like 5, 6, 7-year-old Hannah thinking about?
Yeah, I think I was a big fan of the singer Michael W. Smith, and I wanted to be a singer just like him. So I think there was this VHS video we had of his concert where he played trumpet and sang, and my parents got me this little plastic trumpet for Christmas, and I would play it and pretend I was Michael W. Smith, and I wanted to be a singer just like him.
That's amazing. I love that question, those dreams, because I've realized that they actually have more to say about like today than we think sometimes.
Yeah.
I mean, not that, I should just be a professional athlete, which I think every 30-year-old male is still like, yeah, that's still the one I dwell on,
Yes.
Yeah. Well, cool. Your book, which we are going to talk a lot about, but Single Life to Live. Can you just talk a little bit about like how that kind of came to be? Why did you decide to write that book, and what was going on in your life that kind of led you to that?
Yeah, so I wrote this book after having a hard experience of becoming single. So in college, I dated someone for almost all of college, and then a couple months before we were going to graduate, we had previously decided that we wanted to get married. So we got engaged and we planned our whole wedding. And then just a few months before it was supposed to happen, he told me some truths that made it very hard to continue the relationship. So we struggled for a while. And then ultimately, I just realized that we should not continue the relationship. So I thought I was going to get married, but just a couple months before, we broke off our engagement, broke off the wedding. And I was about to graduate and enter a time where I thought I was going to get married, I was going to do a certain job, I was going to move and all of these things. And I realized that all those things I planned were no longer going to happen the way I thought it was going to happen. And I was reaching this state of singleness, which I never thought I'd be in again. I never wanted to be in again. And I was just devastated that that was happening and so confused and struggling so much with it. So I experienced that at the beginning. And then about 5, 6 years later, I realized that I was still single, but I was really happy. So all of a sudden I went from, being in singleness and struggling and hating it and fighting it to many years later realizing my circumstances hadn't changed, but my heart had really changed. And God had used so many different sermons and pieces of the Bible and different mentors and things like that to make me have a view of singleness that was very different from where I started. So as I realized that and I started meeting people who were struggling in the same way that I was struggling with singleness previously, I thought, maybe I should write all this stuff down, because if I would have known this when I first became single, my life would have been so different. So maybe I can help some other people going through the same things that I was going through.
Wow, that's so good. I mean, and I think from the young adult perspective, I think as you get older and older and older, the singleness starts to hurt more and more and more. And I
Yes.
think the resources that we have for marriage is unlimited. Like
Hmm.
when I do premarital counseling with a couple as a pastor, I have 10 books that are all great that will get you about to the same place if you follow it. Where
Yep.
singleness is kind of like this abyss. And so when you were stepping into that, you made that hard decision for your own life, for your own self that, led you back to singleness. What was kind of like going on in your heart at that point? Like, what were the fears or what were the thoughts that were on your mind late at night?
Yeah, so I feel like there's a lot of different things, and it kind of depended on when I started and then as I was going along the journey. So I think I just really struggled with, first of all, should I make this decision? Because everything tells me that happily ever after is getting married. So why should I not move toward that? It was very scary to think, I don't know what my future is going to be if I make this decision, but if I do go ahead and get married, I at least know that I have that relationship, guaranteed for a time. So I struggled with that. I struggled with what other people thought of me, all of those things. And when I entered singleness, that was huge. I had to tell people that, I wasn't getting married anymore who were invited to the wedding. And that was really difficult. But I also took on myself a lot of the things I associated with singleness, which was, you're not chosen, you're not loved, there's no plan for you, your life isn't exciting. All of those things I kind of put on myself and saw that as my identity. So I struggled with so many different pieces of singleness in the beginning, especially around my identity being, all of the negative things associated with singleness.
Do you think, is it safe to say you felt like your life was maybe taking a step back? Or like, is that how
Yeah.
you felt at all during that season? And uh, why do you think that is? Like, I think that's a common feeling when somebody maybe transitions at a time they weren't expecting.
Yeah, I definitely felt that way. And I feel like for me, marriage or a relationship felt like a milestone that you're supposed to reach. And for me, growing up, a lot of friends and family went to college and then they got married at the end of college. That was kind of the order of things that you do. So I wasn't doing that. And it felt like I had missed something, like I wasn't getting that achievement that I was supposed to be getting. It felt a lot, I talk about this in the book, but it felt like I was on the B team and I wasn't promoted yet to the A team of marriage, where, everything's better. You're in that higher category of people because you're married now. So I definitely felt lesser because I hadn't reached that achievement that I thought I was supposed to do at that time in my life.
Yeah, I think of that too in my own journey, in my own story. So I ended up um I was in a relationship that was at the end of college and the year after college. And so thinking that I was going towards marriage and, you know, kind of abruptly ended, kind of caught me off guard completely. And I remember some of those same feelings and like, I've almost like felt like I've suppressed those, and I did
Hmm.
get married not terribly long after that. Like things on my timeline were just different. But I just remember that initial feeling of like, oh shoot. Like
Yes.
I felt like I was starting all over again.
Hmm.
And I in hindsight, I was 22 years old and I had my college degree, but I felt like that I was missing this major element. My roommates were getting married and all of these things. And I just remember feeling like not like my life was over, but like I didn't know where to even begin again. And how
Hmm.
did you begin to pick up those pieces again? And like, what was that process like in those early months? You said 6 months. You looked and nothing had changed, yet everything had changed. So, what was kind of the starting point for you?
Yeah. So I feel like I felt the exact same way, where it's like, oh, the whole slate of my life is just wiped clean. And what am I supposed to be doing with it? I was so frustrated frustrated. So for me, there's just a lot of stuff I had to learn. So I did a lot of counseling right off the bat, which was super nice and super helpful. And that we really focused on what are the small things every day that we can focus on that are blessings and can make us happy and things like that. And focusing on the good or what we can look forward to, even if it's just I'm having coffee with a friend and that's really nice. So doing some of those steps were really big. But the big thing that changed my mind was a sermon I went to where we talked about identity and how identity isn't those negative things we associate with ourselves, like I was doing in singleness. Our identity is that God loves us and nothing else matters beyond that. So that totally changed my mind of thinking no one loves me to God loves me. That is the most important thing in the world. And, I'm alone. No, God is with me at all times. Or there's no plans for my life. Nothing's going to come out of my life. I'm just in this terrible place of waiting. Who knows what's going to happen to God has plans for me. He promises he's going to work things out for good. So that piece of identity, I knew, my whole life Jesus loves me, but that was the first time I really had to put into practice trusting God and understanding this is what it means to be loved by God when I'm in a place of suffering, in a place where I can't see what the future is going to be, all of those things. So that was the biggest thing that really made a difference for me. And once I realized that, then I was able to kind of write out every single struggle I had and start working through it. So, oh, I'm feeling lonely. Okay, where in the Bible can I look into that and get reassurance and things like that? Or, oh, I'm dealing with all this baggage from, relationships or even eventually trying to date again. Okay, what does the Bible say about that? But having that foundation was able to just make me go to a safe place where I could once again work through all of those difficult things that come with being single on top of, all the other baggage and things like that.
Everybody's journeys are so different in this. You have people that maybe feel that way, but then they're in a relationship 2 months later, whether that's healthy or unhealthy relationship. And so what do you feel like that person maybe that is feeling that way, but they are feeling hopeless or feeling like they're not enough? Like, what advice do you give to that individual that's saying like, I am ready to date, like I want to date, this is a desire that I have, and I think it's a healthy desire, it's a good desire, but it's not happening? Like, what's your advice to that person?
Yeah, I think I definitely was in that place for a long time, if not years. But what I saw and what I continue to see in my life is that God is a way better author for my life than I could ever be. So God showed me this in really tiny ways throughout the past couple of years, and now he's turned it into such bigger ways. So, when I was in college and my engagement was broken off, I had this whole idea of what my life was going to be like and the way it should go. And I thought, this is what's going to make me happy if these things happen. And then they didn't happen, but instead all these other things happened. So since that engagement was broken off, how my life has played out, I have gotten jobs that are way better for me than the job that I was going to get out of college. I've lived in places that are better. I've traveled the world, which I never wanted to do and never realized would be a cool thing to do. And ultimately, out of me not getting married, I had this book come out and I have a whole career coming out of it. So there's just been thing after thing where I would have never for myself thought, this is what I want. But instead, God allowed this bad thing to happen in my life. He didn't let that relationship continue and he let me be single. But out of that, so many good things has happened and they're so much better for me than anything I could have come up with on my own. So I feel like it's very easy to think like, I really want this relationship right now. And it's so much in front of you and you're seeing all these people in relationships and getting engaged and married, but God has you where you are for a reason. And he promises he's going to work it out for good. And even though you might just feel like you're in a period of waiting, God has plans for you. And you can either say, I'm going to be miserable and I'm going to be upset that I'm here, or you can say, God has me here for a reason. So I'm going to make the most out of it and be as joyful as I can right now.
In your book, or in just that message, you also talk about like the waiting is obviously waiting for a desire, that we have, or that an individual has, but it's not waiting for your life to begin. It's not waiting for the best part of your life or a good part of your life. Can you just speak to that idea of somebody that's saying like, I'm waiting for this, yet I feel like my whole life is on pause?
Yeah. So the person I talk about in my book for waiting is Lazarus, because his whole story was super fascinating to me of what God is doing in waiting. So Lazarus died And Jesus knew that he was sick, and Jesus actually waited. So he allowed Lazarus to die. He allowed all of his friends and family to feel extreme pain that Lazarus did die rather than just healing him in the beginning. But because of Jesus allowing Lazarus to die, it says, so many people started believing in Jesus because they heard or saw this miracle of Lazarus being raised from the dead. So Jesus could have just healed Lazarus in the beginning, and, people have been like, cool, another miracle of healing. But instead, Jesus allowed everyone to wait and actually suffer more. And then something so much better came out of it, of all these people who believed and will now be in heaven with us. So I think when we feel like we're in these periods of waiting, of, oh, I got to wait, until I'm in a relationship for my life to begin, I think that's the wrong mindset, because God is working in it right now. So, we can sit for days, weeks, months, years waiting for something to happen, but we can trust that God is working right now in it. So, again, you can either just sit back and see what's going to happen, or you can be excited about the journey and see what's going to happen and trust that God has in store for you what is best.
That's so good. What do you think some of the myths and misunderstandings people have about singleness?
Yeah, I think the biggest one for me personally in singleness was I got a lot of advice of like, God has someone out there for you. And then I started opening up the pages of the Bible, and it's like, God does not promise that I'm going to get married anywhere or that I have a spouse. But God does promise that he loves me, that he's got good plans for me. So I think I had to really come to terms with the fact that if God is good, he knows what's best for me, and that might not be a spouse in my future. So I think I got a lot of Christian advice, Christians who are good, well-meaning and everything, who are like, oh, don't worry, there's someone out there for you, when my relationship was broken off. So that was a big one. Other things too, like you'll find someone when you stop looking, which, everyone who's married didn't just stop looking. That's not true. There's a lot of
Right.
weird advice out there, like, you just got to be more spiritual or more connected or something. And it's like, nope, married people aren't better than single people in all of these categories. So I think the real thing is God has a plan for you. And no matter what the weird advice is, it's up to God of when these things are going to happen or how they're going to happen. So we like to give advice to single people, and I've heard so much of it where it's not necessarily biblical. It's supposed to be helpful, but it's just not. So I think it's better to focus on what does God actually say, which is he's got plans for us and he loves us, and we might not know what that looks like, but we can trust him in that.
That's so good. I think a lot of those people are well-intentioned people. A lot of them
Yes.
are aunts who care deeply about us, and
Yes.
parents who care deeply about us, and you know the hurtful comments, or the comments that maybe they don't think are hurtful, but like, when are you going to get married so we can have grandbabies? And you
Yes.
know even one of the things that has just come to my attention through just different conversations is just like, even when we pray, we can sometimes pray like, God, help them, you know, become the right person. And I think the intention behind that prayer and that encouragement is so good. It's like, yeah, we want to be the right person. But at the same time, it can almost feel like, well, I'm not yet the right person, so that's why nobody wants me. And so
Yep.
how have you dealt with some of that advice? I think that's one of the biggest things I hear sometimes is like, people say dumb stuff. How should I respond to it? How should I not walk away bitter and hurt? So how should I move forward in a healthy way?
Yeah, I think knowing the intent behind it, like someone is only giving you advice because they care about you. I think that's the important thing. And depending on the person, like you know the person giving you advice. So you can either sit down and have a conversation with them on like, here's what I'm going through and here's how I feel, and not necessarily calling them out, but just giving them more understanding so they understand maybe why some of the advice isn't the greatest. And I think for me too, just telling people what to do instead of giving advice like that. So things that have been really big for me are people just supporting me and where I am in my life. And I had both married friends and single friends who are a great support system in singleness of, knowing what meetings were going on and texting me like, hey, how'd your big meeting go? We're praying for you, things like that. And focusing on my dreams and my aspirations and what I'm learning versus always going to, hey, who are you dating? How's your dating life going? I think it's way better for a single person to hear, we care about your life, what you're doing, versus just always focusing on that dating thing. Because in singleness, you're already focusing on it so much. You don't need your community to reinforce that necessarily. So I think for me, I always knew people are giving this advice because they have good intent. And then if I was super close to them, it's like, okay, I know we love to talk about my dating life, but this is actually what's going on in my life. So I'd appreciate if we talk about these things a little more versus my dating. And, I'll bring it up when we need it, but this is better. So that's kind of what I did. And then obviously I wrote a book and people read it, and that helped reinforce everything I was saying, where they're like, oh, that's what you're going through. Okay, now we know what to do. So I know my mom said after she read it, her whole idea of singleness completely changed. So that was really helpful for me too.
Right. And I think, that you said some things that are really powerful. Like, I think trusting people's deepest desire is, hey, I love you so much and I care about you, but also helping them help you. And so what are some of the things that you have for advice for the church and just for friends of people that are single, and maybe it's people that are single that those people have that expectation or that external pressure of, because you're this age or you're in this season, this is where you should be in this area. So what advice would you have for the church and for the pastor that's wondering, how do I lead people through this season?
Yeah, I think some things that have been big for me are my pastor preached sermons on singleness. Normally you hear sermons on marriage. So even having an occasional sermon completely on singleness is like, wow, cool. Because I think as singles, it's easy to feel like you're not seen, like you don't matter. So when the church takes time to specifically focus on singleness, that's super, super helpful. But I've seen a couple ways that things play out too. So I think, some singles want a singles group at church, but for me, I really found it helpful to have a group of people who weren't focused on my relationship status. So being in a church community, I had a small group that was everyone from people who were younger to me to a lot of people who were my parents' age or older. And we all got together every week and ate a meal together and talked about God's word. And then the focus wasn't on like everyone is single and we need to figure this out. It was more, we have this church family and we're supporting each other and where we're at, whether that is talking about the struggles of singleness or, other struggles that we're all facing in life. I thought that was really good. So I think, meeting singles where they're at, understanding what they're going through, but then encouraging them as much as possible in their lives, because singles don't have that significant other to talk about the highs and lows of everything. They don't have someone to go to, who's their main person necessarily. So being involved in their life, knowing what's going on in their life outside of dating is just such a big thing of, what dreams are they chasing? What's their work like? What are their studies like? Whatever they're doing. Paying more attention to that than singleness is huge, has been huge to me. And just being excited about my life as a person, not feeling like I'm incomplete and actually feeling like I'm a whole person from the church,
Right.
which is really, really nice.
When I think relationships change in general, like as your relationship status changes. And so
Mhm.
I remember when I got married, like, of course, exponentially my time with my wife grew. And now that I have kids, like obviously they take a lot of that time that I have in my life as well. So relationships around me change in whatever season, but obviously that's one of maybe the first like distinct changes. You go from college where you're just doing life with people and you are living with people and you have all these close friendships, and then one by one your friends start to get married and those relationships change. I had one question on Instagram today. It was, what are the best ways to support my single friends when I'm not in the same season of them? And then another one was just, how do you maintain strong relationships while while somebody else's relationship status changes?
Yeah, I think a big thing that I saw or have seen is make sure to invite single people always, even if it's a bunch of couples, don't make the decision for them. Always invite them because they can make the decision themselves if they feel like, it's all going to be couples and I don't want to be there. It feels a lot better to be invited and make that decision yourself versus having that made for you. So I think that's a big one. I think thinking about what needs you can help a single with. So me, for example, I'm a small female. So meeting up with people, in a city somewhere is not always my favorite thing because walking somewhere alone isn't the greatest. So doing things like offering to give someone a ride for a meetup, or for me, like lifting things that I can't lift in my house, like all of those things were really helpful. So I think it's kind of unique to each person of, hey, can we make you a meal so that you don't have to cook by yourself every single night? Can we, offer some support in any way is very, very helpful to singleness. But I think also just because people are in different stages of life doesn't mean we can't understand, what a person is going through who's in that stage of life. So for me, my some of my best friends, are people who are married, and some of the people who really helped me with my book on singleness are people who are married. And they were the people that, after they put their kids to bed, they would stay up with me late at night, brainstorming and talking about all the pains of singleness. So I think, even though circumstances will definitely change, you will not be in the same circumstances as your friends 100% of the time because everyone is constantly changing. I think you can always still relate to what someone is going through in their other circumstances. And if you can't, ask them questions so that you can. And then, yeah, you're going to be busier as you have kids and all of those things. But what I've seen too is, as a single, it was so nice to be part of that when people did get married and have kids, because it's like, oh, I really wish I had kids right now and I don't, but you have kids. So I'm so happy to be able to be around those children and see what life is like on this side of things, and then have some more perspective of this is what married and children life is like versus my single life and all of those things. So I think don't just like put people in categories of, oh, you're single, you don't want to be part of this. I think inviting and, having people join is really important.
Yeah, that inclusion. I think back to my own story. I had friends that were married quite a bit before I was. And I think those, not that I blame anybody, but those that made the biggest impact were the ones that invited me in. I think of my friends, Nate and Whitney, who would just have me like literally stay overnight at their house different
Yes.
nights. And I remember one morning, Nate had to go to work early. I was sleeping. I was still a college student. I was like towards the end of college, and I woke up and Whitney made me like brunch, and we just hung out for like two
Oh,
hours. And
yep.
uh, it was like a picture into their marriage, into their life. And I didn't feel like the single friend. And
Yes.
I remember kind of a powerful moment was I was invited to a birthday party for a friend, and I was there. It was all of our close friends, and then I started to like look around at all the tables, and there was 13 couples and me. And so there was literally 13 couples. I was the 27th wheel,
Yeah.
and this was Kayla Meyer's birthday party. I remember distinctly. It was at Hoo Ha of all places,
Mhm.
and I didn't feel like out of place. And that whole night, I didn't feel out of place. I actually felt very included and very loved, and I didn't feel like at all like a charity case. And I
Yes.
think we can so easily, especially when we start throwing around labels like that's my single friend. We need to.
Yes.
We almost like there's a difference between intentionality and charity. Like being
Mhm.
intentional of saying, hey, we want to invite them into our life. We want to just allow them to have the key to our house, the refrigerator rights, in our
Yes.
home and in our life. But not because they're single and we feel bad for them, because we just love them and we care about them. And so I think that's a distinction as well that from my own experiences I've learned, as well.
Mhm. Oh yeah, definitely. That's huge.
Yeah. So I love that of just like that inclusion. Um, Talking about your life with them, I think you said just because I was single doesn't mean I can't relate to somebody's issue in their marriage or their life. Like
Mhm.
we can still have those same conversations with those friends that are in a season of singleness, or in a lifestyle of like a life of singleness. Like I
Yes.
think that's something too. I just wanted to briefly touch on, because I feel like there's the young adult singleness, and then there's like the people that are okay, now they're in their 35 40 years old, and maybe they're more so questioning like, okay, is this where God has me for the long haul? Obviously, that's not your story, but is there something that you would share with them, an encouragement that you would share with them?
Yeah, I feel like, it's pretty similar with any type of singleness, but then even when you're younger and you're single, you're like, oh, this can change. But then when you reach a certain age, even like, especially as a female, and you're like, oh, I wanted children. Maybe I can't have children, the way I wanted to now. I think that gets really hard. But again, I think something that was helpful to me was the longest we're going to live on this earth is like 100 years, maybe, and probably not even that. But that small speck of time compared to our eternity in heaven, it's just so tiny. And, we're all going to be in heaven partying with Jesus and so excited. And we're going to be like, oh man, I was so sad that I was single all those years. I don't think that's going to happen. I think we're going to be like, wow, God was so good to me in all of those years, regardless of my circumstances. So for me, something that has been helpful, granted, I haven't, gotten to an older age where I'm single and I don't know what to do. But what was very helpful for me was just that perspective of, someday I'm gonna die and be so happy and be with Jesus. And if I look at it from that perspective, my singleness, I feel a lot different than looking at it here right now and feeling like I'm just stuck and struggling. So I think looking at what the big picture is versus here's what my daily struggle is super helpful for that.
That's really good. I think contrary to how some people think, marriage and relationships don't actually complete us. But
Mhm.
how would you maybe encourage someone to maybe shift their view of marriage, or from a biblical lens, or just from your own discovery and what you've written about? How should we look at marriage?
Yeah, so I think something that was helpful to me was my married friends were really honest with me. Those same married friends who were so helpful in my singleness. They weren't necessarily like, we're going to tell you absolutely everything happening in our marriage, but people who I really respected their relationships and thought that's a relationship I would want to be in. Like, that's the type of marriage I would want. They were honest about, like, hey, we fight, we cry, we struggle. It's not this beautiful picture. It's also something that's super hard. And every single day, you got to wake up and think, I'm going to put this other person ahead of me. And now that I got married, 3 months ago, I see that fully. I learned about it in my singleness, but now it's like, yeah, that's hard. And, there's challenges in singleness and there's challenges in marriage for sure. So I think just having a healthy view of marriage, of it's a blessing from God, but singleness is also a blessing from God, just intended for different people at different times. But marriage is not perfect. It's not the Disney perfect ending to your story where everything is suddenly going to be happy. I know for me, it's like I had anxiety before I was married and I still have it. It did not magically go away. So all the struggles that you have in singleness, if you ever do get married or in that relationship, you're bringing that with you. And then you're working with two people versus just yourself. So, working through singleness and finding happiness in singleness is going to help you for the rest of your life, whether you are single or you're married. But having a normal view of marriage and seeing that, marriage is flawed and ultimately it's pointing to our relationship with God. That's what it's really doing, which we have whether we're single or married. That's the important thing to focus on.
We'll wrap up here in just a couple of minutes, but kind of to wrap up a little bit, that dating area. So you're single, you desire to be married, you're content, you're living on mission saying, God, you have so much more for me. What was that season like for you, especially that post college and kind of in that young adult, young professional stage? What was that like? And just want to speak to that for a bit.
Yeah, it was a mix of emotions, I want to say. I feel like I still struggled with what is God's plan for me right now? I have no idea because I'm a person who's a planner and I like to know, this is what I'm working toward, this is what I'm trying to do. So, in the first many years of it, it was just, okay, I'm here. I got a job, I'm working on this. I don't know where it's going, but I need to figure out how to basically like what I'm doing now, enjoy what I'm doing now. But God had some really cool things where I was traveling the world for work and meeting all sorts of cool people and doing things that I never thought I'd be able to do, especially for work. So I really enjoyed that. And then, yeah, once I started, listening to that whisper of writing my book, I would just go home every single night and start working on that. And every weekend and every scrap of time I had over lunch, anything like that, I would just start working on that. And I felt like for so long in my life, I wanted God to show me very clearly, this is what you need to be doing with your life, or this is what your purpose is, things like that. And for a long time, I didn't know what that was. It was just, make the most out of what I'm doing. And then all of a sudden it all kind of clicked of maybe this book is what I'm supposed to be doing. So I felt like that's the first time where I felt like I had a very specific, like, I think this is what I'm supposed to be pursuing right now. But that took, like 6 years to get there in my singleness. So for a long time, it was just, maybe God has me in this time of life to learn and grow and experience things. And this is great. And then once I really had my, here's what I want to be doing, then it was taking off and being so excited about, maybe this is what I'm supposed to be doing. And maybe I'm just helping myself through it, or maybe I can help other people. I hope I help other people, but, I'm learning and growing through this. So I think overall, just a huge time of growing and learning and changing as a person for the good. I'm much happier with the person I am now than what I was a decade ago when everything happened.
Wow, that's so good. And I think, one kind of question along with that is, how does somebody know that they're ready? And how did you know that you're? I think that's maybe like one of those misunderstanding questions, but also a real question of like, how do I know that I'm ready? We hear so many messages, especially in Christianity, about, what needs to take place before you can date or before you should date.
Yes.
But just in your own experience and just addressing that.
Yeah, that was a struggle for me for sure. So I waited maybe a year or so after breaking off an engagement to even try to date. And at that point, I just felt so awkward. Like, what do I even talk about? All of my latest experiences are just breaking off an engagement. And like, what a sad date to just talk about that to a stranger. So I struggled for a while of like, how do you even date? What are you supposed to talk about? And I don't want to be fake. So I probably started dating a bit after a year, but dated and nothing ever went anywhere. It's kind of like, this person's nice, but we're not right for each other, over and over and over and over and over, and me just getting very sick of it all. So I reached a point where I was writing my book and I was like, I don't need to ever get married. Like, it'd be cool if it happens, but it doesn't matter. I kind of reached a point where it's like, I like my life so much that it doesn't matter if I have marriage or not. Like, whatever God decides is cool. But then for me, actually, the guy who is my husband, he asked me out and I wasn't looking to date at all. So I was like, nope, sorry, I'm writing a book on singleness. Like, I'm not really interested in dating right now. I wrote him this whole long message that he laughs at now. And we met up again at a wedding of our mutual friends, and he asked me to dance, and we talked the whole night. And something kind of shifted in my mind of like, I could see something happening with this person. And the more I got to know him, he was very passionate about God and, talking to people about it and spreading God's word in whatever way he could. And it's like, I think we could serve God together, like in a very good way. So for me, I think in my mind, what I always had is, if I can serve God better with someone versus by myself, then that's someone I want to move forward with and really pursuing and seeing if marriage is there. So that was what shifted my mind to say, yes, I will date. I tried dating people before that and things like that, but that's when it was like, this is serious. I'll actually go on numerous dates and pursue marriage. But it still took me probably, about 2 years of just praying and, God, is this right? Dealing with a lot of baggage I had from previously being engaged and thinking about trying to get engaged and married again. I had to work through a lot of that, especially with my future husband. And he was very good in that also. I think for me, I had to just, trust God in it. And I thought I kind of knew I wasn't going to get married. And then God's like, oh, look at this person. So
Right.
that's how my mind kind of shifted there.
I just love that. Just like that picture of, contentment and security and just identity. And not that it's all to completion, like none of
Mm-hmm.
us are complete in that way. But just that those questions changed, I feel like for me anyways. And it sounds like for you of just, what does this person add? How can we impact the kingdom? How can we make a difference? Not as much like, how can they complete me? How can they fix my problem? How will they, help me do this or that? And so
Yes.
I just think those questions that you're asking, I think maybe an honest inventory for our audience is just like, what are the questions you're asking right now about dating and that person? And that might give you a lot of perspective on, should I be really pursuing this right now? Or is this something that I just need to bring to the Lord again and say, hey, God, you know my heart, and He does. But let me trust you. So
Yeah,
good. This has been
definitely.
so fun. One of the questions I love to ask is, what's one piece of advice you would give to your 22-year-old self?
Yes, I feel like it's simple, but you can trust God, because I think my 22-year-old self was for the first time actually having to put that into practice. And it's like, okay, I'll try to trust you, but I have no idea where this is going. And now me on the other side of things is like, wow, if you would have just stopped freaking out about your life not going the way you thought it was and just trusted God, these great things are coming and God was working things out. Some of them I've seen, some of them maybe I'll die and God will be like, this is why it happened, or something like that. But I can trust God rather than just seeing the worst in the situation. There's the good there. And now I understand that a lot more. But man, back then I did not want to do that.
Wow, that's so good. Where can we find your book? How can we buy it? Audience, I want you all to buy it. I'm so excited, but I haven't been able to read it yet, but I've been able to just kind of dive into it a little bit and just what your team sent me. I'm excited to read it as somebody who leads a young adult ministry. I'm very excited, one, for them to meet you, to hear about you, but also to read your book. So where can we find Single Life to Live?
Yeah, you can find it anywhere online that books are sold. So Amazon, Barnes and Noble, Target, basically Googling it, there'll be a bunch of options. There's an ebook, there's an audiobook, everything that you can want there. And you can find more on hannahschermerhorn.com or Only a Single Life on Instagram or Facebook, which is much easier to spell than Schermerhorn. So you can look for me at any of those places.
Awesome. And I will make sure that all of those are linked in the show notes and on the YouTube description and all of those things. Hannah, this has been so much fun. You are so special. And I just think, um, God was doing the right things in your life to write this. And I think it's timely. I think so many people need to hear this message and hear your heart. And it was just a privilege to spend a little time with you today.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Awesome. Thank you. And thanks everybody for listening. As always, make sure you subscribe, you check us out on Instagram, goingsomewhere.podcast, and we'll be back for another episode real soon. We'll see you soon.